Walt, time has creeped up on us. It's about time to take off for the lunch. We certainly appreciate you people on the panel this morning for your presentations, and you people in the audience.
Resource development represents something more than a physical process of mineral extraction and renewable resource exploitation. It also represents a political and social ideology that has dominated Alaska from, so to speak, time immemorial. The phrase natural resource development implies the potential has been unchallenged. Indeed, it has been regarded by most people as the natural order of the universe, and its existence has not even been recognized. This ideology of natural resource development is built into our basic political institutions. Let's look at statehood, for example. The drive for statehood was fired in large measure by the popular notion that, that federal mismanagement and neglect hindered Alaska's development, and that power in the hands of a state government could unshackle Alaska's growth. You may object that many people supported statehood simply for idealistic reasons, for basic political rights of United States citizenship. Nevertheless, even these people had to accept the main consequence of statehood, which was simply that Alaska had to develop. In 1958, Alaska was so poor that its political and economic viability was very much in doubt. Therefore, it was develop or perish. And everyone had to, everyone was obligated to that consequence. The Statehood Act, with its generous land grants and its transfer of mineral lands, was designed to promote economic development so the state could survive. The structures of state government, for example, the very strong executive, were designed with the requirement of resource development in mind. It's my opinion that the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 is built around many of the same values and assumptions that underlay Alaska statehood. It seems to me that important concepts in the Claims Settlement Act reflect the natural resource development ideology. That is, I feel that the Claims Settlement Act is an economic development act in many ways. Fee title to 40 million acres of land, regional corporations for profit, etc. Certainly the support for a native claim settlement on the part of the state government was based on the assumption that, given land, money, and organizational structure, the natives would pursue economic development objectives. After all, this is what the Statehood Act gave to all Alaskans to pursue economic development. However, the situation we face today is rather confused, certainly in comparison with the situation that existed in 1958 or even in 1971. Why? Mainly because of the environmental movement. This movement, which contains many different concepts, interests, and philosophies, has the effect of blowing the whistle on the natural resource development ideology in Alaska and the rest of the country. Now, we all know about this movement and what it has meant generally for Alaska. For our purposes here today, I think it is necessary to say only that the phrase environmental protection has two primary meanings for two different groups of people. In general, it can be construed very narrowly or very broadly. In the narrow sense, environmental protection is compatible with, indeed it is an asset to, the natural resource development ideology. In this narrow sense, it means essentially clean development. It means pipelines that don't break, pulp mills that don't poison the sea, refineries that don't smoke, roads that don't melt the permafrost, and bridges that don't degrade the streams over which they cross. In the broad sense, environmental protection is antagonistic to the natural resource development ideology because it questions the values of economic development. In this broad sense, environmental protection means adaptation to or change or persistence of a lifestyle that does not depend upon full-scale commercial industrial development. It seems to me, Mr. Boucher's speech this afternoon notwithstanding, that the position of the state government is that Alaska will protect the environment in the narrow sense. We will have clean development and thereby become a model for the rest of the nation, which has engaged for centuries in dirty development. For increasing numbers of Alaskans, those who want environmental protection in the broader sense those who are prepared to pay for it in terms of less energy consumption and less middle-class gadgetry in their personal lives. To these people, the state's reassurances that it is committed to protecting the environment are not comforting. I will conclude with one more observation. The answer to the question after the Land Use Planning Commission, what, will depend in large measure upon which interpretation of environmental protection has the upper hand in years to come. I think that right now, the natives may hold the balance of power in this respect, and that their minds are not yet made up, despite the shove of the Settlement Act towards economic development on their part. For example, I interpret their concern with protecting the subsistence base as an indication that they are skeptical of modern commercial development and all that goes with it, roads, more people, and so on. On the other hand, Nana, Calista, North Slope, and Doyon will have geophysical crews exploring their lands this summer. With that introduction, why don't we move along, make notes of questions that you have, and we'll have a discussion after the formal presentations. First panelist today is Mr. Don Blasko, who is substituting for Mr. John Mulligan. Mr. Blasko is a petroleum engineer in the Anchorage Field Office of the Bureau of Mines, the Alaska Field Operations Center. He's been with the Bureau for 17 years. He's been in Alaska for the last 10. Mr. Blasko?
Thank you, Bill. I've been in this room for 15 minutes and I'm still nervous. Thank you. First off, I think I don't have to preface my remarks by saying that the Bureau of Mines is not a land management or a resource manager. But in the strictest sense of the word, there isn't any really type of agency that is a mineral resource manager unless it's those type that are having to do with the conservation measures of the resources. As an example, if you'll forgive me, if I could use the Park Service, after various considerations, they can take a piece of land and look at it and say, okay, we'll make a park here. And they can manage that park, the resources of that park, consistent with their established goals. No one can take a piece of land and say, here's a piece of land, find a mineral on it, and when you do, mine it in the following way for the following reasons. Things like that just don't exist. So probably the closest thing to the resource management, mineral resource management, comes from those agencies that are truly concerned with the conservation aspect of the resource. To give a little background here prepare the point that I would like to make today, the Bureau of Mines was established in the public interest to conduct inquiries and scientific and technologic investigations concerning mining and to conserve material resources and prevent their waste, to increase efficiency in the mining and mineral industries, to promote health and safety in the mineral industries, and to inquire into the economic conditions affecting those industries. The Bureau was also instructed to disseminate information concerning these subjects. That is our biggest product. Throughout the years and throughout the various reorganizations that the Bureau of Mines has, the basic format has essentially remained. Health and safety, one of our bigger and stronger areas of the Bureau of Mines, has just recently been removed. So this kind of leaves us with a more or less of a minerals research and a minerals resources organization charged with conducting the programs designed to preserve an adequate mineral industry acceptable to the public without objectionable social, economic, or environmental costs, and to inform government and private industry alike on methods best suited to attain this goal. However, this does not make the Bureau of Mines a resource manager. The Bureau of Mines recognizes that changes are necessary for logical resource management. in order to ensure domestic needs, and welcomes this seminar and seminars of this type to provide the exchange of ideas in order to be able to be more responsive to the public needs. Although the basic legislation, as previously mentioned, provides the mandate for operation for the Bureau of Mines and for other organizations, it often takes additional or current interest legislation or orders to provide impetus towards those objectives. Case in point is the Bureau of Mines activities related to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. I'd like to provide an example with this and to relate the Bureau of Mines' involvement with the Land Use Planning Commission, specifically the Resource Planning Team. The evaluation of the involvements that were necessitated by the Land Use Planning Commission has served many purposes. Possibly the greatest benefit was or is the task of drawing together the vast amount but widely scattered sources of information in the literature, files from other agencies, and minds of the people, which produce the basis of the minerals inventory. Were it not for this activity, it is doubtful whether the Bureau of Mines would have constructed important information for the public for some time to come. Examples of these are: the Bureau of Mines has published as an open file report some Mylar overlays on a scale of 1 to 250,000, which many of you are familiar with, which depict mineral claim locations for 115 quadrangles out of the 153 quads of the state. This represents over 50,000 claims covering approximately 7,000 mineral properties. This tremendous output has been published by the Bureau as Open File Report 20-73. On the same order, we have published Mylar overlays on the same Series E scale, showing locations of known minerals throughout the state. These maps are accompanied by a computer printout giving pertinent information regarding the mineral properties. The information provided on these printouts basically was taken from the State of Alaska Cardex files, here again cooperation with another agency. Also published by the Bureau of Mines was Mylar overlays showing oil well exploratory locations and areas of oil and gas lease interest. There were 89 of these quadrangles that showed the, 35 quadrangles showing the locations of oil and gas well locations, and let's see, 89, something like 45 for a total of 235 Mylar overlays. The point that I would like to make here is that this information, which has been widely used by the Resource Planning Team of the Land Use Planning Commission, by the native corporations, by the regional corporations, and by private industry, would never, ever have been published or put together had it not been for the vehicle, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which brought around the necessity to provide a comprehensive mineral inventory. This information has existed and will continue to exist, but it isn't useful to anybody unless it's brought together in one place in a usable form. To elaborate further on that point and to stress this point, one of the primary results of the inventory activity was to dramatically focus the areas of information or data gaps. It is this single need that necessitates a perpetuation of some kind of a background support vehicle, such as the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, to stimulate the politics and the funding to perform the work that will fill the data gaps and complete a useful minerals inventory. This is the first step, then, to management of mineral resources. Find out what you have. We must plan now to avoid a metals crisis much the same as we have stepped into an energy crisis. There is increasing awareness being demonstrated in the subject of a metals crisis, which could be brought on by much the same type action as a so-called energy crisis. That is, poor planning, ignoring historical and projected patterns, best used plans, and worldwide politics. The Wall Street Journal recently had this to say: "There is no reason why the group of countries that supply most of our bauxite can't get together the way the oil-producing countries got together on the price of oil. Some type of organization should be established to provide a minerals inventory, with the end result being the creation of a mineral stockpile. Naturally, an undertaking such as this would necessarily be regional. But if we are to attain self-sufficiency, it is absolutely necessary that studies on a local basis be undertaken. That is, what do we have in Alaska? What do we have in Wyoming? What do we have in Colorado? Etc. This information is needed to establish an orderly minerals availability. In-depth studies, aided by drilling and encompassing economics dependent on transportation, treating, and marketing of the ore, are absolutely essential. The stuff that we have in our files now is not sufficient. A correlation of mineral locations and mineral evaluations show that evaluations of these known mineral occurrences are sadly lacking. This is particularly true in Alaska, where out of the 7,000 mineral properties that the Bureau of Mines has knowledge of, less than 10% have actually been evaluated. Emphasis should be placed on evaluation work of known mineral deposits as a means to obtain a true resource inventory. In addition, wilderness-type mineral evaluations of the withdrawn lands, the D2 lands, and the D1 lands are needed, particularly here in Alaska. The authority to provide the type information needed to make fair and logical land use decisions is not now in existence. It is entirely possible that far-reaching decisions are going to be made on the basis of what is not known about an area as well as what is known. To wind up here, it's not hard to find what some of the problems that face the mineral industry are today. The second annual report of the Secretary of the Interior under the Mining and Minerals Policy Act of 1970, June 1973, pretty well points up the fact of an emerging knowledge that there is a trend developing and expanding which presents difficulties in improving the mineral posture in the United States. It is interesting to note, however, that some of the loudest cries of alarm today were whispers of concern early in 1973. Perhaps by merely recognizing that these problems are being recognized, we will be able to proceed in an intelligent and beneficial manner. But we must realize that something needs to be done. A reevaluation of our minerals inventory is urgent. And the only way we're going to get that is to have special interest legislation passed along the way. Thank you.
Our next panel member is Mr. Barney Coster, who is substituting for Mr. Yates, who couldn't be here today. Mr. Coster is project leader for the National Forest Service D2 Land Studies. He has been with the Forest Service in Alaska for 15 years. He served as a ranger at Sitka and Juneau, chief of recreation and lands for the Alaska region, as well as supervisor of the Chugach National Forest. Mr. Coster.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. In answer to the question, after the Land Use Commission, what? We must place ourselves at a point in history. History is important to give perspective from the past to the future. First, we must note the presence of forest reserves or national forests in Alaska since 1892. We must recall the efforts of former regional forester and later territorial governor Frank Heinzelman and others to develop the timber industry in southeast Alaska in response to the express wishes of the people of Alaska. We recall the latter conflicts of this same industry with newly awakened concern for the aesthetic and other resource values within the inland passage. We must quickly pass over the story of growing expertise of forest management in resolving conflicts in other areas, but learn from their mistakes, profit from their success, and apply the best knowledge to the Alaska scene. Our panel is to address itself to natural resource management. For the U.S. Forest Service, the topic and the question involve some definitions. Natural resources include all of the resources available from the land. Scenery, including sunsets over the rugged mountains, wildlife, moose, caribou, common red poles, lesser yellowlegs, wolves, mink, marten, and a whole array of fish, mammals, and birds. Minerals, oils, and gas, rangeland for wildlife and horses, reindeer, and other domestic animals, a host of recreation values, hunting and fishing under state law, primitive camping in the bush, developed campgrounds, public cabins, trails, ski resorts, lodges, and where Congress and the public want it, through wilderness. Watershed management to hold the soil in place is also important, to prevent pollution and to maintain a protective cover of vegetation on the soil. And special uses, oil and gas and other utility lines when in the public interest. Hydroelectric projects when analysis shows them to be necessary to meet the public needs. Yes, and trappers, line cabins, and other special needs of society. I could say last but not least, on forest lands, timber and wood products. But would you believe, lastly, timber and wood products in some forests, this is the case. Over half of the national forests, for example, are in areas of non-commercial forest or areas managed for uses other than timber management. Because of our national responsibilities for leadership in the management of forest lands for all of their multiple values, not only on national forests, but on state and private lands as well, our agency is directed through various acts of Congress to perform three major roles in natural resource management. These three roles are, first, the state and private forestry responsibility, whereby we assist the state through cooperative funding. We also have programs that provide direct assistance in forest land management for private landowners. Persons involved in the wood products industry and to the state and local governments are also involved in this same program. Second, wildland research. In this role or program, research scientists conduct both basic and applied research to find answers to meet the needs of private landowners and state and federal agencies. The third is the role of the management of the national forest system itself. I want to talk about the first two areas. They tie into the third as well, as you will see. Today, our state and private forestry program is limited in Alaska. It is limited because our state and private lands have also been limited. This is not to say we don't have an action program now. For a number of years, we have operated several programs. For example, in cooperation with the state forester, we have been conducting sawmill clinics to help bush villages become self-sufficient in manufacturing saw and house logs for their local needs. We contribute substantially to the state fire program and assist private landowners in tree planting and other land management activities. We have had a forest product utilization specialist working with local industry to make the best use of and to conserve Alaskan wood products. We have provided technical forestry assistance by working closely with the Land Use Planning Commission. But the situation is rapidly changing. From a private land base of 1 million acres, we see the Alaska Statehood Act and the Native Claims Act bringing on a state and private ownership of nearly 150 million acres. By rights, you could justify increasing our effort by 150 times. Realistically, however, this would mean 600 people that would be involved in the effort. However, but I do see I do see potential for a greatly increased effort in the state and private field. I want to emphasize that this program is a nationally ongoing program of cooperation administered in conjunction with the state agencies. We can foresee some very exciting potentials in these new programs. One such program is in the area of land use planning. Primarily through the efforts in the 180 million acre national forest system, the Forest Service has developed a comprehensive and sophisticated system of land use planning. Basic to this system is public involvement for the purpose of developing regional goals and objectives for the allocation and management of land. For nearly 10 years, the Forest Service has experimented with an array of computerized models and programs which will store natural resource information, array various combinations of resource allocations, and display quantitatively or subjectively, depending on the type of resource, the consequences of each proposed allocation. What this does is to make possible the quick determination of alternatives available and to allow the decision through the socio-political process of the most favored alternative for management. Through our state and private forestry organization, we see the potential for providing the technical assistance through computer specialists and developed software to establish a computer system that can accommodate the current resource information and data systems available through the Land Use Planning Commission, the Bureau of Land Management, the State Department of Fish and Game, and others, and provide a multitude of services in this way to private, native, state, and federal organizations. In addition, traditional technical service in forest land management, wildlife, recreation, watershed, and forestry can be provided through various departments of state government, the state forestry, forester, or directly. Fortunately, all of the enabling legislation is already on the books to allow the Forest Service to go forward with this kind of program. All that is needed is recognition of the need within the state of Alaska, and of course budgetary consideration in the Congress. The second area I want to talk about is the Forest Service Research Program. We are charged with a major responsibility for wildland management or wildland research throughout the United States. The Forest Service maintains a major unit in Portland, the Pacific Northwest Forest and Range Experiment Station. Branches of this unit are the Forest Sciences Laboratory in Juneau and the Institute of Northern Forestry at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. The Forest Sciences Laboratory has responsibilities under a nationwide forest inventory program to provide all ownership with land resource inventory basic to land planning. Other technical service such as detection and evaluation of disease and insect problems are undertaken by the lab as well. The Institute of Northern Forestry at Fairbanks is conducting basic research concerning the taiga and tundra of the north. As land is transformed from public domain to private ownership and active management systems, it seems essential that the basic knowledge of the northern environment be better understood. the Institute of Northern Forestry can enhance studies being conducted by the universities and others to speed the process between management by intuition and management from a sound database. It is our belief that given the active support from within the state, our research program can be increased considerably. What then after the Land Use Commission? I see an expanded era of cooperation between the various jurisdictions. I see this as a necessity because of those straight lines on the map which require cooperation for management of watersheds, wildlife herd units, human use zones, and other ecosystems which cannot conform to the draftsman's straight edge. I see expanded wildland research by many entities, including our own. I see many public forums, regional and ad hoc advisory boards, meetings such as this, setting public goals and socio-political processes defining priorities and objectives. I see public programs of assistance in land use planning, providing alternatives and their consequences for public consideration and intelligent decision-making. By nature, I'm an optimist because I've seen the productivity of the land at close hand. I have confidence in our ability in Alaska to meet the challenge of Alaska. This is where working with your neighbor is still one of the virtues. With our three arms, the National Forest System, the wildland research, and state and private forestry, the Forest Service looks forward to sharing a vital role